Welcome everybody to tonight's lecture. Good to see everybody here. It's always a schus for me, a merit to me to be here with CHAZAQ. As we all know, CHAZAQ, believe it or not, is a world-renowned institution, organization. Yaniv mentioned the book that I worked on, which will be available after the lecture, L'chaim, 18 Chapters to Live By. The publisher was in Israel, and they heard of CHAZAQ. So CHAZAQ is known all over the world. I want to just thank Yaniv Meirav and his brother for all the work they do. They're Moser Nefesh for the community. They work ceaselessly to make sure the Jewish people in this community and beyond have a way to be connected with Torah and learning and mitzvahs, and they provide beautiful shiurim and talks and so on and so forth. So I want to wish them a lot of hatzlacha and brachas in all the work that they do. And it's really a very special thing for me to see people here tonight. I know gas is hard to get. I don't know how many people walked here or hitched a ride here or whatever you did, but it's good to see people here, even though it's the times are a little bit shaky. I also think it's important, before we begin the talk tonight, to just reflect a little bit on a somber moment. We know that we have Jewish people that are suffering and have experienced terrible disasters, property and homes that have been destroyed. It's, thank God our community was spared, but it's incumbent upon us. We have a responsibility as a Jewish people, as a Jewish nation, to care for our brethren, and anything we can do to take care of them in their time of need is a very important thing. So whether it's financial support, giving you time, there are many organizations that are collecting funds for the people who are in need, and we have to maintain the inspiration to help them, because the effect of things wears off over time. Okay, having said that, let's get into the topic tonight, which is we're going to talk about how foods affect memory, concentration, moods, and so on. How many people feel foods have that effect? Okay, good. How many people in this room here have had the following experience? You went into a room in your house and you forgot what you went in for. Okay, anybody ever have that experience? I think I had it at least 3 times today, okay? How many people have had the experience where you came to an event or a function and you were introduced to somebody, and 5 seconds later, you don't remember the name? Right. You have that experience also? Okay. And maybe you sometimes see a person's face. You see somebody that has a familiar face, and for some reason, you recognize the face, but the name just doesn't come to you. You've all had experiences like that, right? And then there are times where you might point to something. You might say to somebody, "Can you please pass me that thingamajig over there," right? You forget the name of an object or an item. Now, what are people concerned about when those kind of things happen? Memory loss. What else? Alzheimer's disease, right? That's a scary word, right? Or some sort of dementia, or you're losing your memory, your mind, and people get very concerned about that. Okay, so even though we know CHAZAQ is an organization that really does Torah talks, I want to show you that this is a Torah talk because we have an obligation to guard our health. And guarding the health of our body as well as the health of the organs and limbs. Tonight we're talking about the brain. We want to take steps to guard the health of the brain. In the Torah, in Mishlei, it says, "In all your ways you should know Him," meaning we should know God. Meaning we should be able to serve God in all that we do, using our bodies, our limbs, our brain, and everything that we have to serve God. So it makes us, we have an obligation, therefore, to try to take care of our body, because it's through our body that we're able to serve our Creator. If we lose the health of our mind or our body, the ability to do mitzvahs and to do God's will is compromised. So this is why this topic fits into a Torah framework. And the book L'chaim, 18 Chapters to Live By, is a book that was written within a Torah framework. And each chapter covers a different aspect of health, And one of the chapters that I'm going to expose you to tonight is based on the topic we're covering. And I'm also going to throw in some quotes and some things from Dr. Andrew Weil, who some people may have be familiar with as well. Okay, so having said that, I want to move on and just explain one last thing before we really get into the topic. Many of the great Torah sages have all the great Torah sages who've codified Jewish law, including great people like the Rambam, including the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Ben Ish Chai, the Kaf HaChaim, and the Mishnah Berurah. They all incorporated chapters about proper health care in their halachic writings. So you could see all of these great Torah scholars saw the importance and the need to talk about health in their writings. So this also sets the stage for the importance of this mitzvah to guard our health. There's a quote in Mishlei. Many people here might be familiar with it. It says, "He who guards his mouth and his tongue will be protected from affliction." So the commentators ask, why does it have to mention mouth and tongue? Let me read it again. It says, "He who guards his mouth and his tongue will be protected from affliction." So again, the question, why mouth and tongue? So the explanation that's given is that guarding one's mouth implies eating the right foods, while guarding one's tongue refers to speaking properly. The fact that both warnings are found in the same verse teaches that one must be just as careful as what goes into his mouth as what comes out of his mouth. So we have to really be cautious in both areas, because depending on what goes in and what comes out will distance us spiritually from God. So that's one of the things we want to keep in mind as we discuss this tonight as well. All right, I want to start the topic now, and the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of good nutrition equals good cognition, which basically means the brain is an organ that relies on good nutrition. As a matter of fact, I heard a statistic once, and it went like this. It would take the size of 3 Empire State Buildings filled with computers to be able to do what the human brain does. So just imagine that for a second. 3 Empire State Buildings filled with computer equipment to be able to accomplish all the complex functions that the human brain does. Now look how big the brain is. It's very small. It's encased inside of our head. It's not a big, large organ. And nevertheless, look what it's able to do. The process of learning itself involves many steps, including concentration, processing information, storing information, retaining that information, and recalling it from memory. A lot of different steps go into learning. When the heart beats, it sends 25%, with each heartbeat, and the heart beats 100,000 times a day, with each heartbeat, it sends 25% of the body's blood, oxygen, and glucose directly to the brain. So we can see that the brain is the biggest user, the biggest organ in the body, the biggest user of glucose, of oxygen, and blood. And why is that? Because the brain needs these vital nutrients. It needs a large amount of oxygen, a large amount of glucose, and a large amount of vitamins and minerals and blood, which transports the minerals and vitamins to the brain to work properly. Now, what I want you to understand is that what makes the brain work, there are 40 different chemicals called neurotransmitters which basically run the brain. And those transmitters require, in order for the body to make those neurotransmitters, those chemicals that run the brain, we need a vast amount of nutrition, vitamins and minerals and so on. So I'd like to give you a little bit of what we call a mushal, a little bit of an analogy or an example. How many people here do some baking? Anybody bake? Ever bake an apple pie? Raise your hands. Okay, a lot of people have done that before. So let me ask you a question. If you bake an apple pie, you get together all the ingredients, but let's say you're missing one of the ingredients that is necessary to make that apple pie. Can you still possibly make the pie? Yeah, you probably could. The chances are it probably won't come out to be the best tasting pie, because if something is missing, it's going to compromise the quality of that apple pie. But chances are, unless you're missing something so fundamental, the pie will be able to be made. Having said that, when it comes to the brain, if you're in low supply of one of these neurotransmitters, one of these chemicals that allow the brain to function, brain function could be compromised, memory could be compromised. And this is something that I want you to keep in mind, to try to highlight the importance of nutrition as it affects the working of the brain. Now, as we get older, even though we discussed people forgetting occasionally and things like that, as we get older, the brain does shrink a little bit in size.
It does.
Yeah, it does shrink in size a little bit. And there's also plaque buildup on the blood vessels and the arteries of the brain. And there's also inflammation. Also, any underlying health problems, if somebody is diabetic, or they have heart disease, or they have an elevated cholesterol level, that is going to interfere with circulation. And anytime you interfere with circulation, the brain is going to be compromised as well. So there are many, many factors that can take a once well-functioning brain and compromise its functioning. So that's the bad news. The good news is, and by the way, all of those conditions I just mentioned will increase the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's and so on. So that's the bad news. The good news is we can take steps right now that could help us have a healthier brain. And that's really what I want to try to cover tonight. I'm not going to be covering actual illnesses. I'm not a physician, so I don't want you to use this information to diagnose or treat yourself. Always consult with your healthcare professionals, but I am going to present some information on some of the current research on ways to have a better brain, a better memory, and so on. So those are things that I want you to keep in mind. Okay, so in terms of maximizing brain function, one of the things you want to do is to make sure you eat breakfast. Anybody here tend to skip breakfast once in a while? Okay, skipping breakfast, first of all, you'll tend to eat more calories. It tends to promote weight gain. And it also tends to compromise your ability to concentrate and remember and have the mental ability you want to have. We know that when children are sent to school without a breakfast, they don't perform as well academically than when children go to school with a breakfast. I gave we're going to take questions at the end, so if you hold on with comments or questions, we will take them. I once had I spoke many years ago for the annual Torah U'Masorah conventions. I was one of the speakers, and my topic was nutrition and academic performance. And at that convention, I had the opportunity to meet Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky Shlita, and he endorsed my topic, and he even shared an observation with me that Talmidim are not learning as well because they're not eating well. And he said that I can quote him on it, so I'm quoting him right now on that statement. So we could see that eating the right foods, and especially starting your day with breakfast, is very important for brain function. The word breakfast means you're breaking a fast. You just went many, many hours without eating. Blood sugar levels are low, and you need to jumpstart your brain in the morning with a good breakfast. Things like healthy carbohydrates combined with some sort of protein. It could be low-fat yogurt, nuts, seeds, a low-fat cheese. Those kind of things are going to be important to get your brain working properly for peak alertness and for performance. And we will talk more about how these foods affect mood as well. On the other hand, if you get up and you eat a very sugary breakfast, as most people living in the United States do, usually breakfast for most people is going to be the most sugary meal of the day. Usually cake and rolls and pastries and jam and jelly and juice and things that are very refined and processed and so on. So if you eat a breakfast like that, what tends to happen is you might get an initial boost in energy a lift in blood sugar, but you're going to very soon get a crash in blood sugar, and that will lead to an overabundance of insulin will be released, which will lower your blood sugar. You will also set up a cycle for mood swings, for hunger, for overeating, and even obesity. And in some cases, it could be the catalyst for long-term anxiety and hyperactivity. So the wrong type of breakfast could work against you. Skipping breakfast will work against you, but the right kind of breakfast could really get you set for peak performance, alertness, and so on. And we will come back and touch on this in a moment. There are some guidelines that were presented by the Nutrition Action newsletter, and they recommend for good brain health, they recommend some of the following things. They recommend eating fish 2 to 3 times a week, having your diet loaded up with a lot of colorful fruits and vegetables, including things like nuts, seeds, and beans, 4 or 5 times a week, having a fiber intake of at least 25 grams of fiber per day, 6 to 8 cups of water per day, and they also recommend cutting back on sugar, salt, white flour products, saturated fats found in red meats and things like that, and also avoiding hydrogenated oils and fats. Okay, hydrogenated fats and oils are known to damage blood vessels and also known to promote heart disease and increase the risk of stroke. So these are their basic guidelines for building better brain health. Okay, I want to talk about something else. I spoke about this concept of oxidative damage that takes place. I want to see if I can explain that so everybody's familiar with it. How many people here have done the following? You've taken an apple, you've cut it in half. Raise your hands. What happens to the apple once you cut it in half? It starts to brown out a little bit, right? You know what that is? That's oxidative damage. That's oxygen damaging the cells of that apple. If you take a piece of iron and you leave it out in the street, what's going to happen to it? It's going to rust. If it's painted, it's not going to rust. When things get exposed to oxygen, the oxygen molecules damage the cells of those items. Every time we breathe, guess what happens? Our brain cells are exposed to oxygen, and that oxygen has a damaging effect on the brain. Now, I'm not suggesting that we stop breathing, but I want you to know that we have to protect ourselves against oxidative damage through something called antioxidants. Antioxidants, the word anti means against, and oxygen means against oxygen, something that works against oxygen. So something that works against oxygen is an antioxidant. Vitamin C is an antioxidant. If anybody here drinks green tea, it's loaded with a chemical called polyphenols. Those are powerful antioxidants that protect cells in the body. Vitamin E is an antioxidant. So there are literally hundreds of different antioxidants. The key is to make sure that you have a diet rich in antioxidants to protect the brain and the blood vessels and the cells in the body. So again, if you follow the guidelines we already mentioned, it will all be there. I'm going to talk about some superfoods for the brain, and if you get more of these foods in, there's a lot of research indicating that these kinds of foods actually will benefit the brain. Let me ask you a question. Has anybody here ever, you've all seen a walnut in the shell, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you open the walnut up, can anybody tell me what part of the body that sort of resembles? The brain. It's even divided in half, just like the the hemispheres of the brain are divided in half, and it looks like the brain. And they say that walnuts is one of these brain foods. And one of the things that walnuts contains that most other nuts don't contain is a special oil called omega-3. Other nuts contain other kinds of oils, what we call omega-6 oils, but walnuts are one of the few oils that contain omega-3, which is a brain-healthy oil. We'll talk about other foods that contain these kind of oils as well. But that's just one example of a superfood for the brain. Things like avocado, fatty fish, Okay. We're going to give examples in a minute. Walnuts we mentioned, whole grains, blueberries, cranberries, and this one you're going to like. Some people will like it. Dark chocolate. Okay, now when I say dark chocolate, I know you were hoping for some other kind of chocolate, but really it's the dark chocolate with at least a 70% or higher cocoa content that really provides some very powerful antioxidants for cardiovascular health and brain health and so on and so forth. So in moderation, of course, everything is always moderation. Okay, let me give you some other interesting information on seasoning your brain. So we learned a little bit about feeding your brain well. Now I want to talk about seasoning your brain. And seasoning your brain means different herbs that have been shown to have a positive effect on things like circulation and brain health. So one of them is cinnamon. Now cinnamon has gotten a lot of press lately. And one of the things that cinnamon seems to be good for is controlling blood sugar levels and possibly even cholesterol levels. So cinnamon also seems to increase the brain's ability to focus and therefore process visual cues.
Can we close this door?
Yeah. So you can process visual cues with greater speed. That's one of the accomplishments of cinnamon. And by the way, you don't have to use a lot of cinnamon. Maybe a quarter to a half a teaspoon, even a few times a week, will eventually give you some of those kinds of benefits. And it can be added to foods that you like oatmeal or applesauce or whatever, yogurt and so on and so forth. Garlic happens to be another food that seems to be good for the brain. Why? Because garlic is good for circulation. So garlic has a blood thinning effect and an anti-clotting effect. And also the compounds that are found in garlic actually will help to eliminate brain cancer cells. This was based on a report by the Journal of Cancer in 2007. So it's recommended like 1 or 2 raw garlic cloves a day, crushed up or added to foods, provides these kind of benefits. Ginger, a very ancient herb, used in the Far Eastern countries and so on, known to improve circulation and digestion. And ginger also seems to play a role in reducing the intensity of migraine headaches. So there's some connection with ginger and circulation and brain and migraines as well. There's also an herb called saffron. You've heard of that, right?
Yeah.
Saffron? Yeah, saffron is an herb. It's a pungent herb that may help with mild to moderate depression. Adding a half teaspoon of saffron is what they suggest.
A day per week?
They don't really say exactly how often. And the last herb I want to talk about is an herb called turmeric, sometimes known as turmeric. It has that orange color to it. Okay, it's used in curry dishes. Curcumin is really another name for the herb. It's the turmeric gives it the orangey color and so on. And basically what that's good for, they have discovered that in India, for example, where curry is consumed daily, there's a much lower incidence of Alzheimer's disease. Okay? So these are some seasonings that are important for brain health. Okay, the last component I want to talk to you about is supplementing your brain. Okay, what about vitamins and minerals? And what's the role of supplements in the brain for the brain? Now, I could tell you that, as we mentioned earlier, the brain is a big user of important vitamins and minerals. As a matter of fact, a large percentage of the vitamins, B vitamins and so on, are needed to make the brain work properly. So I could just tell you the certain B vitamins, particularly folic acid. People who have low levels of folic acid have been found to be present with a depressed mood, okay, compared to the general population. So there is some link between folic acid levels and something called serotonin levels in the brain. Serotonin is one of those 40 neurotransmitters that help the brain function properly. So there's a connection between low folic acid levels and low serotonin levels. A dose of as little as 200 micrograms of folic acid a day has been shown to relieve depression, and an amount of 200 micrograms can easily be obtained from a cup of cooked spinach. So you don't have to really go overboard. An orange also has the folic acid content. So again, a cup of cooked spinach will provide the 200 micrograms of folic acid that you need. Okay? And also, a good quality multivitamin supplement will provide folic acid. The problem is you could get too much folic acid. You have to be a little careful because a lot of foods today are fortified with folic acid. Some breakfast cereals can give you 400. You may get 400 units in a multivitamin, and before you know it, you could wind up with too much. I personally have developed a multivitamin mineral formula, and I only included 200 micrograms of folic acid because there was a concern of people getting too much from foods that are already fortified. So fortifying foods is a good thing, but too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And sometimes we can overdo it just by consuming a lot of fortified foods and supplementing. So that's why I was careful in the development of this formula to include not as much folic acid. If anybody wants more information on the formula, we can talk to you after about that as well. Okay, so let's talk more about the B vitamins. Another important B vitamin for brain health is vitamin B12. Now, B12 is found in all your animal protein foods. Low levels of B12 are associated with brain shrinkage, memory loss, and depression. This nutrient is typically harder to be absorbed as we get older because we have reduced hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and therefore we may need to rely on a supplement to get the B12 that we need. What I would suggest is that you get your blood B12 levels checked and make sure that you're in a range of close to at least 600. You know, there's a beginning and an end of the range, but if you're in the lower end of the range, like 200 or 300, even though you're in the range, it's more optimal to be closer to 600 or above. So when you get your blood checked, if you are lower, you may want to discuss that with you. There's a unit I will let you know at the end. I have to look up the unit and how it's measured. Okay, but it's a standard unit of measurement. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is a trace mineral called selenium. Selenium, it's a trace mineral, and it seems to be that people appear to be more anxious and irritable and depressed when their selenium levels are low. So it seems to affect us in that way as well. You can correct deficiencies by eating things like nuts, fish, seeds, whole grains. These kind of foods seem to stabilize. These kind of foods will provide selenium, and if you have the adequate amount, it helps to stabilize moods. There's another study that has showed that magnesium depletion, low levels of a very important mineral called magnesium. Magnesium is very important for bone health. It works together with calcium. It's also important for cardiovascular health. But magnesium is also important for the brain. Usually irritability, overactivity, and sometimes insomnia could be due to low levels of magnesium. To boost magnesium intake, include more green vegetables, fish, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. Also, according to some of the research I've done, if you can find a multivitamin mineral formula that provides at least 100 milligrams of magnesium, which is about 25% of the recommended daily amount, it would be a good amount to look for. Most multivitamin supplements don't include that much. In the formula that I developed called VitaShield, we did include 100 milligrams of magnesium. Okay, those are a few things that I wanted to touch on. One more point I wanted to make is that exercising your brain is also very important for keeping the brain healthy. Just as the body needs to be exercised, so does the brain. How do we exercise the brain? Learning, reading, word games, anything that will stimulate the activity of the brain is going to be a way to help the neurons in the brain be more dense. If you work out with a weight, the muscle becomes more dense. If you work out your mind with stimulating activities, even coming to a lecture or having a stimulating conversation with somebody helps exercise these neurons, these nerve cells in the brain. And when you exercise those neurons, those nerve cells in the brain, they become thicker and more dense. And you slow up the progression of Alzheimer's by doing that, because you have neurons that are more densely packed because you're exercising the brain. If you want to put the brain to sleep and harm the brain, so to speak, if you sit in front of a television set, that's going to do it, okay? So try to keep away from a television set and do some of these other activities, learning a new skill, having a hobby. All of these kind of activities will stimulate brain function. So that's really something you want to do. Okay, what I'd like to do is I want to just talk a little bit more about the food and mood connection and sort of give you some ideas of things that might be helpful in that area. So let me just share with you a couple of things about food and mood. Okay, so we know that there are these neurons, the neurotransmitters rather, in the brain, the chemicals that run the brain, and certain foods can actually increase the level of certain neurotransmitters. So, for example, if you sit down to a meal made up of starch, a starchy meal, that's going to raise serotonin levels in the brain, and that's going to make you feel more relaxed. And if you eat a little bit too much, you're going to feel sleepy. So if somebody eats a big plate of pasta, chances are they're going to feel very sluggish and very sleepy. If you eat a smaller amount, you may have more of a relaxing, sedate kind of effect. Now, so that's how something like the starches will affect mood in some way. Now, you also have the protein group. The protein group, by the way, healthy starches will give you that more relaxed feeling. So when we say healthy starches, we're talking about things like a sweet potato or whole grains or eating a squash or winter squash, something on those levels. Those kind of foods are not going to cause dramatic blood swings, but they will provide an elevation in serotonin levels to provide that more relaxed kind of feeling. Now, most meals include, besides the starches, we're going to take questions at the end. Try to remember your question. Okay, in this class, you got to be able to remember your questions. Okay, those kind of starches are not going to make up your whole meal. Usually, you'll have some sort of protein and fat at the meal as well. Let me tell you how protein affects you. Let's say you need to stay up all night, or let's say you're involved in a project you want to remain alert. You don't want to get drowsy. You don't want to fall off to sleep. You want to rely on protein for that. So let me give you the suggestion that's recommended. Consuming a protein-rich snack or meal can make you feel more energetic and less sleepy. Why is that? Because high-protein foods increase the blood levels of a certain amino acid called tyrosine, which the body uses to make up two neurotransmitters that actually increase alertness and your ability to concentrate. So let's say you're studying for an exam, or you have an important project. If you would eat, here's an example of a power meal or a power alertness meal, about 3 to 4 ounces of protein. It could be the fish, it could be chicken, it could be beans, it could be a soy burger, it could be an egg, 1 or 2 organic eggs, let's say. If you have that along with vegetables, and you have a small serving of carbohydrate, such as brown rice or whole grain crackers or things of that type, that would be a meal that would promote alertness. Another option is to snack on a handful of raw or dry roasted nuts. So that kind of protein in those kind of foods is going to make you more alert, more energetic, and so on. Okay, as far as caffeine goes, if you have any kind of anxiety disorder, probably foods with caffeine might not be best for you. If you don't have that kind of disorder, then moderate caffeine consumption certainly is fine and even has some health benefits to it. Okay, what I'm going to do before we stop for questions, which is going to be very shortly, I would like to just cite a few other studies on foods and some of the benefits of certain superfoods that I told you I would mention. So here's some food for thought. This is from a newsletter from Dole, and they say here, yeah, D-O-L-E, the food company, okay? Here's some food for thought. In a study of 800 seniors, those who had the highest intake of niacin, which is, again, one of the B vitamins, had an 80% lower risk of Alzheimer's. And so we could see the relationship with some of the vitamins. Fresh and frozen blueberries are a superfood, okay, for your brain. Animal studies from Tufts University suggest that a daily serving of blueberries may help improve short-term memory and even reverse some loss of balance. Blueberries are also a very high antioxidant food. I could just tell you, they did a very interesting animal study where they had rats, 2 groups of rats. One group was fed spinach, strawberries, and blueberries, and the other group was fed rat chow. I don't know what rat chow is. Maybe it's cheese. I don't know. But anyway, the rats that were given the strawberries, the spinach, and the blueberries outperformed the rats that were given their standard chow on those mazes that they go through. So we could see the high antioxidant content of these foods helped their brain function and their ability to remember and so on. Okay, let me give you a couple of other superfoods. Another superfood, as we mentioned earlier, is fish. Now, many of the cellular membrane, the membranes that surround the cells in the brain, need the omega-3 oil that's found in fish. So fish really is a brain food. And these are the kinds of things you want to include in the diet to enhance the functioning of the brain. Besides being good for the brain, fish is also good for the eyes. It's also good for the heart and the blood vessels. If you're not eating a couple of servings, 2 or 3 servings of fish a week, you may want to start doing it. If for some reason you don't eat fish at all, you can use things like ground up flax seeds, things like that will provide omega-3. But those are some of the things you may want to keep in mind. Okay, before we take questions, I just want to mention once again the book, L'chaim, 18 Chapters to Live By, will be available after the lecture. It's a book of literally 20 years of my experience in the field of nutrition went into it. It's over 200 pages. It's $14, so it's very reasonably priced, and it's filled with a lot of interesting information, important information on foods, on health. Each chapter, there are 18 chapters, covers a different aspect of health, and it's a very user-friendly book that will give you a lot of practical information. Also a wonderful gift item for family, friends, relatives, and neighbors, so that will be available as well. Okay, so let's open up for some questions and comments. Okay, go ahead.
We're supposed to drink 6 to 8 glasses of water. Does tea count as water?
Technically, it does, but it's not really a food. It is a liquid. There is a water content to tea and coffee and juice, but it's not going to be absorbed and utilized as well. Sometimes it could even, certain drinks like coffee and tea may even set up a little dehydration. It has a dehydrating effect, and it doesn't get into the cells as quickly as plain water, even though there is a water content to it. So I wouldn't make it the beverage of choice. After you've got in a number of glasses of water a day and you want to have some other beverage options, tea and coffee and things like that can fit in fine in moderation.
I read that, yes, I read a lot about turmeric, being actually, you could get it in capsule form. I also read something about coconut oil.
Right.
Where do you stand on coconut oil? Because it's very high in fat, but is
right.
it worth?
It's a little bit controversial, although my understanding, based on the research I've done and looked into it, the bad reputation that coconut oil got used to be found in candy bars, and that was a processed coconut oil.
Okay.
The extra virgin coconut oil seems to have some health benefits to it. Even though it's a highly saturated oil, some of the studies show that it raises the good cholesterol, the HDL, but it also may raise a little bit the regular, the LDL cholesterol too. So it's a little bit, I would say in moderation, it is an oil that could fit into a healthy diet.
I heard it's good for even ward off Alzheimer's as turmeric does.
Yeah, I haven't seen research to that effect, good scientific research. I'm not saying it may not have some other health benefits and properties to it, but if it's really the extra virgin coconut oil and it's used in moderation, it could fit in to a healthy, although in terms of one of the best oils I would say is the extra virgin olive oil used cold as really one of the best oils. Yeah.
What are the fish besides salmon and other fish?
Okay, besides salmon, all fish have the omega-3 benefit. The fatty fish like salmon, sardines, mackerel, things of those types are going to have higher contents. But I would say, even if you're getting in one serving a week of a fatty fish, and other times during the week you're using other kinds of fish, whether it's fresh, frozen, or canned, except for smoked. Smoked might be a question. You will be getting in, even herring. Herring is a good fish. It's a salty fish, which has some drawbacks, obviously. But in terms of its omega-3 content, it's one of the higher fish there also. There's probably ways to get some of the salt out of it. One of my friends told me he soaks it in milk overnight, and he gets the salt out that way. Okay, yeah.
I think in units, the 600 units. What do you mean, 600?
600 what? Regarding...
B12.
Yeah, 600 units. 600 is, when you get a blood test for B12, there's a measurement, which I'm going to have to look up to see what the actual, how they break it down. But it should be at least 600 or higher, they recommend. Yeah.
Does it make a difference whether the fish is farmed fish or wild fish?
Okay. I would say his question is farm versus wild. Probably wild would be a better choice. The only issue where that really comes into play is really when you're talking about salmon. Almost all of the fish is really natural, but salmon is really the only one that comes into play. You can get wild salmon; it's more costly, but 80% of the salmon sold, is usually farmed. Although canned salmon, a lot of the canned salmon is actually wild. If you look on the can, it will say, and that's a viable way of getting the omega-3. The only caveat is that you have a salt content, which everybody has to be careful with too much sodium and so on.
Fish has omega-3.
It probably does, but maybe not as much. And it may have other contaminants and things that you may not want to have too regularly. Yeah.
You mentioned that there are certain things we should have a couple times a week, some things every day. So my question is, does it depend on a person's body type and age and things like that in terms of, whether it applies to each person? And also, how do I know what amount of fiber, what amount of protein I need on a daily basis for each person's?
Right. Okay, it's a very good question, and it's as Ariel said, it's really an individual kind of thing. It's the information I'm giving out now is really general, but you'd really have to consult with a nutritionist to really tailor a plan that would really work for you in terms of protein and other things. In the book, there are some very good guidelines. There are guidelines that will help you, and there are some tables and things there that will give you some guidelines, but you still need to really consult with a professional to really tailor something that might be more specific to you.
But protein shakes in the morning is good?
Yeah, a protein shake, depending on the ingredients, could be a good kind of thing. I would just stay away from the soy powdered protein. I would not use that, but whey protein or other kinds of protein shakes could provide some benefit. Yeah.
What about those 5-hour energy drinks and all these vitamin water stuff? Are those okay for the body? To some extent? Or
it depends. A lot of those things do have sugars and sweeteners and things like that in it. I would say probably plain water is your best bet, and things like green tea or coffee or herbal teas would probably be better options, I think.
I have two questions. First of all,
Your book is called Chaim.
L'chaim, 18 chapters to live by.
Is
Right.
there anything related to Judaism in your book?
Yeah.
And the other, I have
Yeah.
a question after that.
Okay. Yeah, the book it has a Jewish orientation to it in terms of the main focus of the book is to really show people that the importance of guarding our health. And that's the emphasis of the book. And the chapters each deal with different aspects of health. And there's a Jewish philosophy that is built into the book to show the importance of that. Yeah.
And the other question was, when you talked about starches making you tired, why is it that athletes have a plate of pasta before running?
Yeah.
Right,
And they
right.
have all that energy.
Right.
I know it's supposed to be it turned into sugar and give them energy, but why doesn't it
Right.
put them to sleep while it puts everyone else to sleep?
Right. It's a good question. I'm not so convinced that that's all they have is pasta. They probably have some other things with that meal, or even if they just have a pasta meal, they may have something in between that may have some way of offsetting it. They're using the pasta to, get the glucose into the muscles and into the blood system, and to sometimes store it as glycogen. They're loading up on it. So they're doing things that we typically wouldn't do, but they're most like it also depends on what they're using it for. If it's a short-term or long-term kind of event or activity, so there may be different applications on how to use the carbohydrates depending on what they're actually using it for. But it's not all they're eating all day long. They are using other foods too that may have a. But it's a good point. Someone who didn't have a chance yet, this gentleman in the back.
Assuming you're eating a well-balanced diet that you say, are supplemental vitamins really necessary, and a corollary, can they even do harm if you're getting all the nutrition?
Okay, excellent question. Very good question. It's a very good question. It's asked often, and there's still a debate in today's world whether you need to supplement if you're really eating a well-balanced, healthy diet. The truth is, it's hard to really get everything exclusively from foods. 80% of the population is deficient or have low levels of vitamin D. That's one example where you could justify the use of at least a vitamin D supplement to correct those deficiencies, because you really can't do it with food. The only food that has a natural source of vitamin D is fish. And even if your levels are already low, even if you ate fish every day of the week, it probably wouldn't be an adequate amount to get them where they need to be. So a supplement would play a role there. Having said that, nobody today really knows what a balanced diet is. Even though we have a lot of good foods, the other problem is that when you take a head of spinach out of the ground, one day after it's pulled from the ground, it loses 50% of its vitamin C content. So foods today, 100 years ago, our grandparents or great-grandparents were growing the foods in the backyard. They pulled the spinach out, it was on their plate that night. Foods are shipped, they're stored, they're handled. The soils that they're grown in are questionable. So it's very possible in today's world that you could have either outright deficiencies, as in the case of vitamin D, or even subclinical deficiencies, which really don't show up in pathology, but they could still be affecting us in some way. On the other hand, supplements that are not well balanced or taking too much of certain things could be potentially harmful. There's no question about it. That's one of the reasons why I spent a lot of time researching and developing a formula where we try to put together nutrients that are not in any kind of toxic range. And it's there just to fill nutritional gaps, really. Like the formula has extra vitamin D. We put in 800 units of vitamin D instead of the 400 that's mostly found in other formulas. And if it's a well-balanced formula and it's used in conjunction with healthy eating, I think that's sort of the best of both worlds. But you have to really speak to somebody that knows what is a good formula and what's appropriate for you, and where there might be ingredients that could be problematic. The other issue with the vitamin and mineral industry is that it's not regulated. So sometimes you don't know what you're getting in the bottle. ConsumerLab.com does a lot of independent research, and they have found a lot of problems with different companies and how formulas are made. It's another thing that motivated me to make up a formula and to work with a company who's very, very reliable. So I knew the ingredients I was getting and what's going to be in the bottle and how the formula, how the pill is actually made. met certain specifications. So there's a lot of factors that have to go into it. Consumerlab.com. They do give you some information, but it is subscription. You have to, but there is information they will give you. They independently test a lot of products. Yeah.
With nuts, is it better roasted nuts, or not roasted?
I would say I would use nuts, preferably raw. If you want to roast them on your own. This way there won't be any oil content added to them. Okay? Just don't burn them. Don't make them black. But that's
you
what.
See like planters, it looks healthy, but there's a lot of sodium.
Yeah. You got to watch. I would say raw, unsalted nuts are probably your best option. And if you want to roast them on your own without getting them black, burning them, that would be another option. By the way, there is an email list. If you want to send this around, if we just pass it to tables, I could keep in touch with people this way. Just write it clearly if you could. Maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll.
Organic versus non-organic food.
Okay, the question was organic versus non-organic foods. I would say that I would try to incorporate some organic products in my diet. Certainly when it comes to dairy products and eggs, things like that, you're probably better with organic because of how animals are raised and so on and so forth. I would also suggest that, where you can get organic, try to get organic. It is better. It is better. It's grown on soils that are better, and environmentally it's better. Might be a little more costly, but if more people are using organics, hopefully the price may come down. Whether you have to do all organic, 100% organic, I don't know if you have to do that. I don't know how feasible that would be, but trying to incorporate where you can, I think would be a good idea. Yeah.
Does microwave affect the food when we cook with microwave?
A microwave? There's still a debate. You have scientists on one side that say the microwaving of food may affect the molecular structure, the chemical structure of foods, and there are others that say the foods are safe. So I wish I don't know if we really know the long-term effects, but that's sort of where the issues seem to divide. So I personally don't use one, but I know when I go out to a restaurant it's probably used, but that's what I tend to do. Okay, I think.
What is your take on raw food diet?
Raw food diet?
Specifically from protein perspective.
Yeah, when he talks about a raw food diet, you're talking about raw fruits and vegetables and all raw.
No fish, just
no fish. Yeah, you could probably get adequate protein if you're eating nuts and seeds and things like that. I don't think too practical or realistic for most people, but I do believe incorporating some raw foods at every meal, or getting in as much as you could, plays an important part of a healthy diet. Yeah, let's see.
Raw fish.
Who said raw fish?
Raw fish.
Raw fish? What about it? What's the question?
Every day?
I don't see why you couldn't eat raw fish. But I don't know about eating. I don't know if you need to eat it every day, but that might be a little bit much. But incorporating fish, if you're comfortable eating raw fish once in a while, or however you want to use it, it could fit in to a healthy meal plan. Yeah.
Turkey as opposed to chicken. I heard that turkey doesn't get the injections.
I once heard that also. He heard that turkey may not be injected with hormones and antibiotics, that kind of thing. It would have to be researched if that's really true. But certainly better choices than red meat.
There are companies.
Better choices. Those are better choices than red meat.
Both of them?
Yeah, either one would probably be a better choice than red meat. In moderation. In the book, we talk about proteins and how much to use and how often. We give a lot of interesting guidelines on protein. So hopefully you'll find more information there.
There are companies that sell meat that are organically raised and grass-fed.
Right. That would be a better quality meat. It would be a better quality meat for sure if it's done that way.
What's an ideal breakfast?
An ideal breakfast. There's so many different options.
I mean, first of all, too many eggs is no good because
No.
of cholesterol. I mean, is egg white, there's no protein in egg white, correct?
No, there is.
Oh, there is?
That's where the protein is.
Oh.
And by the way, the yellow, one of the things we have a chapter in the book on whole foods and the importance of really not separating foods. So even though the egg has gotten a bad reputation over the years, in the latest studies on eggs is that you can eat as much as one This is for the average healthy person.
Okay.
Can eat as much as 1 yolk even every day of the week, and it won't affect cholesterol levels. If you already have an elevated cholesterol level, I would discuss it with your doctor. I'm not necessarily suggesting eating a yolk every day, but there is research stating that it doesn't really affect cholesterol levels in a healthy person. I would say I would probably limit yolks to maybe three or 4 yolks a week, preferably maybe 3. That would be moderate.
Only 1 egg a day.
That's according to the research,
Okay,
right?
So 1 egg, that's not enough. That's not going to be satisfying enough.
Yeah. So again, you could vary your breakfast. Probably the best combination would be some sort of a complex carbohydrate, with, let's say, oatmeal cereal or a high-fiber cereal, and put some nuts in it or something. Then you have a protein and you have a high-fiber cereal.
Granola, is that like nuts?
Depends on what it's made with. Some granolas are better than others.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
Question about juice. Not that juice.
Just regular fruit juice you're talking about?
For kids, no, it's apple juice.
Oh, juice, yeah.
Full sugar.
The downside with juice is that it's I'll just give you an analogy. If I had a glass in front of me, an empty glass, and I squeezed a fresh orange into it, I wouldn't get a glass of juice. I'd get a little bit. I'd have to squeeze 6 or 7 oranges. When I drink that glass of juice, I'm now getting the sugar in 6 or 7 pieces of fruit. Normally, I wouldn't eat 6 oranges. I'd eat 1. So juice, unfortunately, even though it does contain some of the vitamin C and other, it comes along with a lot of sugar. What I would do is if you get an unsweetened juice, it still has a lot of sugar because it's concentrated, it's from the fruit. I would mix it with water. Cut it with... Initially, whether it's a kid or an adult, they're not going to like the change in taste because it's not as sugary. But after a couple of weeks, they're used to it. You could put in even a quarter juice, and I would notch down so it's not a shock to somebody. Start with 3/4 juice, 1/4 water, and then go down to half, and then maybe even a quarter. And
Is that considered like 6-8 cups of water a day? Could that be?
It would count for water, but technically, would it really count as one of the 6 cups? I don't know. But there is a water content there. It's mostly water, I would say. It won't absorb as quickly into the body as plain water, though, because the body has to digest whatever sugar or other ingredients are in the juice. Yeah.
And how does agave nectar compare to a glycemic level of sugar?
Agave nectar is a natural plant sweetener that is lower on the glycemic index compared to other sugars or sweeteners, but it will raise blood sugar, but not quite as high. It may not spike it as a refined sugar will. Stevia probably is one of the better, for a diabetic, a good quality stevia liquid, we carry it in our office, is probably a better choice in terms of not really impacting on blood sugar levels. Honey will affect blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
Not to say it can't be used, but, okay, yeah.
Recently I've been hearing that there are actually some benefits for caffeine.
Yeah.
Can you discuss that?
Yeah.
I always feel good when I drink coffee.
Yeah, right. No, there are health benefits to caffeine. Again, in moderation, it does have some health benefits. I've seen some research lately that says it may even reduce the risk of Parkinson's and things like that. It may be if you were drinking it for a while, a couple of cups a day. If you just start drinking it, I'm not sure. But basically, caffeine comes from a bean, right? And the bean is a warehouse of antioxidants and nutrients and so on. So you're really basically eating something that had a good source to it. Drinking something in this case that had a good source to it. So you do get just like whether it's green tea or whatever, it's coming from a good source, so the antioxidants and the nutrients are still part of that. But in moderation, obviously, if you drink too much caffeine, your body starts to lose calcium, and you don't want to overdo it. But it has health benefits, just like alcohol in moderation. Red wine, things like that in moderation have health benefits too. Okay, I think we're going to hold it here. I just want to thank everybody for showing up. I'm very impressed with the turnout tonight. I want to thank CHAZAQ again for sponsoring the talk.